in just a second.
Well, she just squawked at me that your recording's in progress, so I think you made it work.
We're good.
We'll wait another minute or so here as you're allowing people in. Oh, we can see Linda Martin's forehead.
Evan.
That's so much better, Linda. Thank you. So we can see your entire face.
Maybe the forehead was enough.
Don't be silly. We want to see your entire face.
Oh, it's older than when you saw me last.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, yeah, look at, just keeps going away.
Some of us have donned masks since we last saw each other. So, we've forgotten what the full face looks like.
Yeah, you go on Zoom, you have to put on makeup.
Well, only the parts we can see.
Why she was just using the forehead.
I gotta make
Yeah.
it so I have to make it so you can't see that half of the room. Would be better. Why you're all gonna look there?
Okay. Well, I have 202. Jim, anybody else out there waiting?
Well, I only have 102.
I'm further
Yeah.
east than you.
Well,
All
it
right.
seems like we've got some other people, I think. No, I guess this is everybody, and I assume Cheryl will pop up here again any moment as well. And so this looks like everybody that we've got
Okay.
right now.
And Cheryl's heard it, so I'm not so worried about that. All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our town hall meeting today. I'm Kevin Barger, for those that I may not have met. And what we're trying to do here today is talk a little bit about some upcoming bylaw changes that are going to be presented next, well, not next week, but the week after, for membership consideration and vote. And this really represents the conclusion of a lot of work from a lot of years. So this started several years ago, and it actually was, Linda Martin may remember this, actually came to us vis-a-vis the regional presidents that said, hey, we really need to be looking closely at the function of what we do as president, especially when we move to having a president and a director at large for each region. So the board has been taking a look at that, thinking very seriously, while at the same time remembering all the things that are important to ALCM in terms of geographic diversity and making sure that we are well represented across the country in all regions. And so this is not a move to get rid of regions. So please hear that, as this is not what we're doing. We're not getting rid of regions. This is just a restructuring of the board. And then the other thing that we've been looking at in the past couple of years is looking to expand voices that are heard in board decisions and ALCM construct and how we move forward. So just making sure that we reflect the diversity that is ALCM. Yes, thank you, Mike. That's a good lead in there. We met in August as a full board, and at that time we had made the decision that we wanted to go formally forward with making changes to the board, both in number and structure. And you'll hear more about that in a second. And then we appointed a committee that was led by Julie Grindle and some fine folks, Arletta Anderson. Mike was part of that, as well as I was. And who am I missing? Who else was on that, Mike?
Bob Hobby.
Bob and
Kim Kramer.
Kim Kramer, yes.
Arletta Anderson.
Got her, yes.
And did you mention Ryan?
And Ryan, yes. And now his last name's escaping me. Ryan Hostler. Okay, so we worked together with them, and they came back to us with here's what needs to happen in order to make this move forward, and how the bylaws would need to change in order to support that. So again, this will increase our board stability as we move forward. And it also makes it a little bit easier. You can see number 3 here is about standardizing terms and start dates. For those who may not have been involved on the board, this is probably the most confusing part of our job, is remembering who comes on and off when, and who has to be elected when, and because it's kind of all over the place. So this new structure will align everything sort of in series of threes, I think of it as, and Michael, you'll see that when Mike explains it, the details. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike now because he is our secretary treasurer and as such has all those fun details to share with you.
Thank you, Kevin. So I don't intend actually to talk too much about the actual language in the proposed bylaw revisions. Those have been available to you. They're on the website. And Kevin or Jim, maybe one of you could grab the link, or Cheryl, and stick it into the chat in case people wanted that link handy where they could go look at the actual language. We would welcome questions as we're going along. Typing them in the chat box would be great. And if there are questions or comments about that actual language, I would love to hear them, because I don't want to have to come back and revise the bylaws again next year because somehow we just didn't get the language right this time. So you could probably be help to us if you did spot something that could use clarifying. So the changes to the current structure, so this is kind of the bigger picture. The president and president-elect, that's a 6-year sort of process between president-elect, president, and past president will be unchanged. And so Kevin, in fact, will be finishing his term as president, I think, this summer. And the new president-elect will become president. The secretary treasurer, we are recommending, the only change would be that the term would go from 4 years to 3 years. Some years ago, the treasurer's term was put to 4 years in order to provide more stability, figuring that it took 1.5 years for someone to figure out the finances of ALCM before you could actually make any helpful comments. With our enlarged staff, especially a full-time executive director, and we now have 2 people in the office working, keeping an eye on the finances. 3 years seems to be plenty long for that stability for the treasurer spot. And so we thought that changing from 4 to 3 to align again on these 3-year cycles would be a good thing to do. The regional presidents and directors at large, the current board has 4 regional presidents and 2 directors at large. We are proposing that those be replaced by at least 6 directors. And the term being directors, so there will no longer be regional presidents. There will simply be 6 directors. And we are proposing the bylaws to say at least. The board's intention is actually to go quickly up to a board of 12 instead of 9. In order to increase the number of people on the board, hopefully bringing some different voices representing different part of the country, different demographic, different skill set, small congregation. I mean, all the kind of things you might imagine that we would want to have represented on our board. But we didn't want to have to go back in 3 years if the board decides this was really crazy going up to 12. We want to go back to 9. That we didn't want to revise the bylaws again. And so we just made it say at least 6 directors. And the term, we're wanting to lengthen that from 2 to 3 years to be on the 3-year cycle with everyone else. And that will provide, again, I think, good stability on the board because it takes 1 year to figure out what you're doing. And so then you would have 2 good years and possible re-election. A board and a not-for-profit is always balancing out 2 things. One is you need new, fresh faces to bring new energy and new ideas, but you also need a certain amount of stability. And one of the things that people on the board talked about our old structure was we could have had years where we had 5 new board members out of 9. And that is just bad for the stability side of that balance. And so doing it this way with 3-year terms going up to 12 directors, we're hoping that would all become more standard and more stable while allowing sufficient new people to join the board each year. And everybody would start their term on August the 1st so that Kevin won't be confused any longer about how long he's in office.
Doesn't take much to confuse me.
So that's kind of where we're headed. And then a lot of the text in the actual bylaws is how do we get there? So how do you make a transition from 9 to 12, and how do you do that, changing term lengths from 2 to 3 or 4 to 3? So again, the president-elect and president would be unchanged. Nothing changes as far as that in the bylaws. The secretary treasurer and the current directors who are currently on the board. So that is 7 of us. We would all have our terms lengthened by 1 year. So the people who should be elected in 2022 would not be up for re-election, or that spot wouldn't be open until 2023. I look at that as just kind of retroactively lengthening their term from 2 years to 3 years, which would be the new norm going forward. So if we do that, we would keep our current 9 members sitting on the board for another year. And then in 2022, we would elect these 3 new directors to 3-year terms. So by lengthening those terms for 1 year, we can immediately expand the size of the board from 9 to 12, rather than having to phase that in over multiple years and kind of taking forever to get there. I did not come up with this idea, but when someone suggested it, I thought it was brilliant as a way to kind of easily get to this goal of more people serving ALCM.
And just a note on that, Mike, sorry to interrupt, but
That's
for
right.
folks to know, all those people in those roles currently have agreed to serve that extra year if we would pass these changes.
Thank you, Kevin. That's important to say. So then here would be the elections coming up in the near future. So in 2023, we would need to elect. So in 2022 we would be electing those 3 new directors. Then in 2023 we would elect a president-elect. This is the other kind of strange thing. We would appoint 2 directors. The board would appoint 2 directors to a 1-year term. And then the membership would elect 3 directors to 3-year terms. Appointing directors to a 1-year term sounds initially like not the best idea. And in some ways it's not, but it is again a way to kind of make this transition from 9 to 12 and to make that happen. Our thought on the committee was that we might either appoint someone who had finished a term on the board quite recently, and so they would be familiar with the board and ALCM and how we operate and could jump in and not be a wasted year. The concern would be that someone is just a placeholder for a year. That doesn't really benefit us as an association. Or we could think, the nominating committee could think about finding someone to appoint for that 1 year who might also then be willing to run or to be elected to a 3-year term following that, so that again, you would not have a wasted year. There are several ways we could look at that as we go forward to make that work. And then in 2024, we would elect a secretary treasurer and elect 3 directors to 3-year terms. And then ever after that, we would be electing 3 directors every year to 3-year terms, and the secretary treasurer and president-elect every 3 years, or however that works, so that it would be very regularized. There would be regular turnover on the board. Folks, of course, are all eligible for re-election except the president. They get 1 6-year shot. So the other change that we're proposing then is the way we wanted to clarify the nominating committee, and then there's a change to the electoral process that I think is fairly important that we want to make sure everybody understands. So this is the wording in the proposed new bylaws. The nominating committee will consist of the president-elect or past president and at least 3 directors, and such other voting members of the association as the board shall appoint. That last bit is kind of the change. Our current nominating committee consists of the past president and the 4 regional presidents. And we want to make it so that non-board members I'm thinking we would for sure appoint some. Non-board members would serve on the nominating committee and help us figure out who the right people are to elect to the board in any given year. We foresee the nominating committee operating on a more year-round basis and being much more active in trying to raise up and find people who would make good members of our board. And by having non-board members involved in that, that will strengthen that whole process, we think. And then nominations will continue in the way they have been for the president-elect and the secretary-treasurer, which is we would nominate 2 people for those offices. For the 6 or 9 directors, the new bylaws state that they would be elected from a slate recommended by the board of directors, which means that the board could recommend only 1 nominee for each director spot. Right now, everyone has, all of our elections now are contested. By moving it this way, there's, I think, two benefits. Well, first of all, we could continue to have contested elections. The bylaws don't forbid that. They simply allow only 1 candidate. The 2 benefits could be that sometimes, even in spite of our best intentions, we end up with a board that is too much one thing and not enough of something else. Right now, frankly, we have way too many men on the board compared to the number of women. And so by proposing a single candidate for a spot on the board, the process we could fill those gaps in a way that would make the board, again, more representative of the association. And then the other thing is that the regional presidents, especially when they would have their nominating committees, just reported how difficult it was sometimes to find 2 candidates to run for a spot, especially if an incumbent was running. It would be difficult to find a second candidate to run. And Cheryl Dieter from the office could tell you many stories about how long it has taken sometimes to find those people. And so by the possibility of only nominating 1 person for a slot, we think that whole process just might flow more smoothly. So that's kind of the nominating and election. So what would happen if we nominated 1, let's say we nominated 3 directors for 3 slots, the membership then would have a ballot in which you would vote yes or no on each nominee. If the person got over 50% of the votes, yes, they would be in office. If they received less than 50% yes, then the board would need to go back and come forward with another nominee. So the membership would still have the power, if you will, to either approve or not approve someone that the board had brought forward. And we wouldn't anticipate that happening, but the membership still has ultimate power over who sits on their board. Kevin, I hope I made that clear. You can jump in on something if I haven't been clear, as you already did. All right, so that's kind of the stuff that's covered in the bylaws. The committee and the board also has had some additional conversation about the whole nominations process that's not in the bylaws. And I think I'm going to turn it back to Kevin and let him talk about this bit just a little bit.
All right. Thanks, Mike. So I've been trying to answer some questions in the chat as we've been going here. And but the process that we're going to sort of move forward here, the things that Mike was just talking about are the things that come as a result of changed language in the bylaws. This process is not specified in the bylaws. It's not bylaw language, but sort of the way it would run is in the fall timeframe. We would have a call for nominations, which would include call for nominations from general membership. It would be expanded from where it has been in the past. Members can nominate themselves, they can nominate someone else. There'll be a time period and a way to do that. And then we would move into the winter months where the committee, the nominating committee that Mike was just speaking of, would recommend nominees to the board and say, we think this meets the representation and does these certain things. You know, one of the things that's important in this is that the nominating committee, as they go out and search for things, the board can go to the nominating committee anytime and say, you know, we really need fill in the blank. So like Mike was saying, you know, we're male dominant right now. In the past, we've not been that way all the years that I've been involved, but right now it is. So we could go to the nominating committee and say, we have a need for women. We could even go further and say, we need women in Kansas City, for instance. Linda, I'm picking on you. So the committee would then recommend these nominees back to the board. And then in the spring timeframe, the board would make a recommendation of the nominees for election, and then we would hold the election as we've always done in the past. And then everybody would start, and get me right on this, Mike, it's on or about, is it August 1st? On or about August 1st?
Well, it's the language is August 1st or until your successor has been duly elected.
There you go.
So, and that's already in our bylaws with the current mishmash of dates.
Yes.
So, you know, if for some reason the election was slightly delayed and didn't happen till August 18th, because of who knows what, whoever's in office would keep going until then, even in our current bylaws.
Yes. So that's sort of the process that we would follow there. And it would be a year-round kind of always ongoing activity in some fashion. There'd be something going on with that nominating group.
I'm going to stop sharing then, Kevin, if that's
Yes.
okay.
And Fran, I was starting to type before I had to talk there. I saw you had a question or comment about, yes, I've been in organizations like that too, where there's a cadre of a certain number of people that just seem to take on different roles through the years. And actually, I think this does protect that. There are restrictions already in there, which I don't know offhand. Mike might know them, that say about how long you can serve in any given role.
Yeah, so for example, the directors are elected for 3 years, can be re-elected once, so a total of 6 years. And if you're appointed to fill out a term. We had a debate. And so if you look in the bylaws, like if you were appointed for 2 years, could you be elected then for 2 3-year terms? That's 8 years. We decided no. So if you're appointed for 1 year to fill a term, you can be elected twice. If you're appointed for more than 1 year to fill a term, you can only be elected once. Because of that very concern, Fran, we did not want the board to be self-perpetuating. Although stability is a good thing, as we all know. I mean, you know, especially when we are financially in great shape. I don't think we need to be shy about saying that. And the more money you have to manage, sometimes the better some stability is, because you're just kind of keeping track of things. So that's that balance between stability and newness.
Right. And at the same time, we don't want the issue where we're faced with 9 out of 10 members are new. And I think I answered all the other questions that were in the chat. Is there anything that I missed, first of all, or are there other questions we have time that folks would like to ask? And maybe Jim can unmute you and bring you on. You can just ask it, or you can chat it in the window is fine as well.
Right. Since the group is small, we'd be happy to let you actually talk.
We like hearing you.
I wonder if it would be helpful to anyone, Kevin, if you kind of walk through the answers you put in the chat box, just in case anybody hasn't seen those.
Sure.
Walk through that conversation a little bit.
We'll go back here. So one question was about the board members being elected to represent geographic areas, which I think we've talked about already, so I won't rehash that one.
Yeah, Kevin, if I could just, I mean,
oh, go ahead.
They're not going to really represent a particular geographic area in the way our regional presidents kind of do. On the other hand, I was thinking about the board right now. there are multiple members on the board right now from all regions except Region 3. So I think the nominating committee in 2022 would for sure be looking for at least one new board member from Region 3 in order to make sure we have people in the different parts of the country. We talked also about, just related to this regions thing, is that the regions are still in the bylaws. We did not get rid of those. And we foresee having regional lunches, meetings, whatever they are, every other year at our biennial conferences. And, you know, and that the president of the board would simply appoint a board member to go to Region 1, Region 4, and to kind of chair or run that meeting. So we do understand that it's great for members to connect with people who live relatively close to them. All our regions are huge. And allowing that or enabling that at conferences will continue to be an important thing for us to do.
So while the board member won't be elected, say, for example, as members of our state assemblies are to represent a group of voters, but as far as the deliberations of the board are concerned, there will be, at least in the operating principles of the board, an expectation that they will keep up to date about any special or overriding concerns of their part of the geography so they can represent them as appropriate at board meetings.
That's absolutely correct.
Yes,
Yes.
we are well aware that different parts of the country, things are different. And so the way I experience Lutheran church music or whatever in Pennsylvania is not the same as Carol Churchill experiences it out in Washington. And so we are well aware of that kind of need to have people with different, and that's part of that different diversity of voices on the board. The upper Midwest is its thing, et cetera.
Great. The next question was about the number of folks on the board in terms of having an even number on the board. And that was a question from Fran. I think that was probably related to voting perspective, because I've heard that as well. But what might not be known to everybody is that the president actually does not have a vote. I'm only here as a figurehead, unless there's a tie. So by going with a 12 number, for instance, or an even number of folks on the board, that's actually 11 votes. So I think we've addressed that.
It basically means the president never gets to vote ever again, whereas the president may have voted once or twice in our 35 years.
Take that as a question from a newbie.
Not a problem. I would venture to guess that non-newbies may not have known that either. Let's see. There was a question about, on the nominating committee proposed, the board could easily decide that only board members can serve. So I think that that's actually the way it's done today. So the nominating committee is all board members. And it's the regional presidents plus the past president make that up. And so this is an attempt to expand beyond that so that those folks don't carry all that weight and have to represent all the voices themselves.
And we went with the language we went with just, again, to kind of stay flexible. We didn't want to specify that it needed to be a certain number of people and, just to give us flexibility. But the intention is for sure to have non-board members taking part in that process.
Yeah, and it's a great question to ask. And, again, as Mike said early on, one of the things the bylaws group looked at was, let's make this so we don't have to come back a year from now, 2 years from now, even 5 years from now and make bylaw changes, because it's a big deal to make a bylaw change and requires a lot of work. So we're trying to make it easier and more flexible for folks as we move forward. And we already talked about that one. So that's all the questions that are in the chat. Anything else that you, we'd love to hear your voice, as Mike said. See, we have no plants on here. There are board members on here, but they're not planted. See, they're not asking questions. They've already heard this. That is one thing actually to note on here, in case you didn't know, that all the things Mike talked about and all of these changes that are proposed have been unanimously approved, quote unquote, by the board for recommendation for approval to the membership. So this was not done in a vacuum, and the board supports this 100% moving forward. So Bob, yes.
I was just going to add, not a question, but just an observation, having served for a brief while on the board. One of the things that was exciting to me is that there's not only an effort to kind of increase the voices on the board, but there's also complementary action efforts taking place to try to encourage more involvement, to serve our membership better in a variety of different ways. And so it's not just a thing for the board purposes. I just see some exciting things happening, realizing where we are as an organization, a strong organization, which is exciting in this time, addressing the needs, the desires, and trying to provide resources for our membership and for the congregation. So beyond the board, I think one of the things in the makeup of the board, one of the things that I was excited about were the other plans and goals and dreams that I think complement this whole restructuring a little bit.
And we are proud to say that Bob will continue working in some of those, even though his stepping down from the president-elect position. But we're very happy that he's able and willing to share his talents in those other areas too. Thank you, Bob. Any other questions? It's like watching Hollywood Squares trying to figure out who's going to ask next.
Ronald, do you have
Ron,
one?
did you have something?
Yeah, it seems in the reading of the bylaws proposed changes that any regional conferences are just kind of eliminated altogether with the little day-long things. So in our area, Region 4, oftentimes these day programs are like almost impossible to get to because you have to go forever. It takes a day to get there and then a day to get back. So we don't get in on that at all. And this year, Region 1 is sponsoring a conference, which seems to be nationally inclusive. I mean, they all are, but I mean, I guess one of the things I've been thinking about is why not have an annual national meeting, national conference?
Can I take that, Kevin?
You could see that we're all laughing here. That conversation has happened. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. So
my concern is that we don't know what that conversation was and why it's not a possibility.
Well, my current life on the board, I've been on the board for you newbies off and on. How old are we, Jim? 35 years? I think about 30 years, which is ridiculous. You all need to fire me.
I think more than that. But okay.
My current life, though, is about 5 years. And I think for 4.5 of those years, Ron, I've been saying we should do that. Just the way the Hymn Society has a conference every year. So the board more recently has actually been talking about, exploring models where you might be how could you make that work? Because, our model of having a huge conference, moving around to a brand new location is a lot of work and in some ways risky because you have no idea till you show up, is it actually going to work out the way we think it is with these hotels and these buses and this, whatever. So we've been talking about ways that it might work. And one of the ways I've thought we could do it is every other year you go back to the same place over and over. And then every other year at the actual biennial conference, you move around the country the way we have been. Would be one way to kind of reduce the workload in those off years. But still, and you have rightly pointed out that the group planning for this coming summer, I told Jim Rindelob, I think the next Philadelphia conference is going to have to step up their game a bit because this thing in Valparaiso this summer is going to be amazing. So maybe we can do things like that every year. We're sure going to look at it.
I've also wondered, and I think this has been mentioned, but maybe not a lot, but I've wondered about in the off years, having a conference that would be in an eastern city, let's say Charlotte, but then repeating the exact same conference in a western city, maybe San Francisco, perhaps, Ron. But, you know, I think that anything is currently a possibility at this point, as we're sort of moving away from that long decades-old structure of always having regional conferences. And perhaps there can be some new things that'll happen with a new energy.
Well, this conference that's happening this summer, basically it's not so much a Region 1 conference as it was a group of people in that region who thought they might want to do a conference. And so they brought a proposal to the board. And I think basically any group of people at any point should feel free and should be encouraged to do that very thing. So Ron, if you and Zita want to take over, bring your best game. Yeah, I mean, the board is so willing to work with people on those kinds of things. It's a great board. I mean, it really truly is. And yeah, anything we can do to further that kind of thing, I'm sure they'll jump right on it.
As I recall too, you know, and I'm thinking it doesn't always have to be at Valpo. Obviously, I'm not a Valpo grad, does that show? But anyway, it's great because we talked about wanting to encourage our young people. So we scheduled having something happen for us old people at Valpo when Lutheran summer music kids were there, so that we could take in what they were doing and kind of cheer them on a bit, and they could, you know, see our enthusiasm too. So I think there was some conversation along those lines. And it's been pretty exciting to watch what's happening with the students. I'm always sticking up for the kids, but
I'm hoping that one of the benefits of moving from 9 to 12 board members is we might have a couple board members who could actually be dedicated to this whole conference kind of idea. Right now, Jim Rindelau kind of spearheads all of that, and the board approves things. Well, if Jim had a couple board members dedicated in that area working with him, his idea of 2 cities, or even just the idea of doing a big conference every year, would be a lot more doable. So these bylaw changes, I think, can also help with the programmatic stuff if we do it right.
To Jim's question, or to Jim's proposal about having an East Coast conference and then maybe having a West Coast conference. Back in the day, pre-LBW days, when we had the ALCW conferences, there'd be like 3 or 4 regional conferences throughout the country, and the faculties would be different, but the material that was covered, that was introduced in terms of the curriculum, if you will, was, as I recall, was pretty much the same at all 3 or 4 of the conferences. So Jim, is your idea to have, if you had an East Coast and a West Coast conference in the same summer, and then in the next year have the one major conference at Valpo, on those, when you have 2 conferences, would you have the same faculty doing it?
In my mind,
Yeah.
I had thought the same faculty. However, anything is possible. Your idea is great as well. So
Using the same faculty is kind of the Augsburg Fortress Music Clinic idea. They send the same people around to multiple places.
Well, as I recall, again, back in the day, I think they brought all of us faculty members together for kind of a, let's all get on the same page. And then we went in our 4 different directions for the different conferences. I mean, we had them at Pacific Lutheran, we had them at Occidental. I was a West Coast guy at the time, of course, but you know, they were in Minneapolis, I think they were in Columbus, so but it was basically the same curriculum, if you will.
also wasn't the every other year type thing. St. Olaf has always had a pretty significant conference, and we alternated years You know, when they were having their big deal, we weren't, and vice versa. I don't know for sure if that was the real reason for that, but made it possible to go to all of the above, right?
Yeah, I think we were happy to not have our big conference in the years that St. Olaf was having their big conference.
Yeah.
And for many years, in those years, the regionals would be held. But we certainly do want to keep track of when the other conferences are. As luck would have it, many of you may have noticed that the Hymn Society is having a very fine conference this coming summer, the exact same week of our Valparaiso conference. But our Valparaiso conference is set up to specifically be the last week of Lutheran Summer Music, of course. So those were our dates locked in. But it is hard to avoid having conferences at the same time as some of these other wonderful organizations.
But we do try to take that all into account. I mean, we spend a lot of time looking and saying, when are they doing theirs? When are they? And we try, but at some point you make a decision and you move forward. And sometimes we don't get it where we want it to be, but we try.
So my sense of the regional conferences and the national conference is that it's probably about the same amount of work. The national conference is a little bigger, but I was on the San Francisco conference committee in 2008, and it's a lot of work. I understand that. So I'm thinking, well, if you could, on those non-national conference years, or even maybe have the national conference rotate on a year basis. So let's say we start in region 1 and then the next year region 2 and so on, so that each region has a workload and expectation of resources from that region and leadership from that region to do an annual ALCM conference.
I think, Ron, what you're saying is really go to an a biennial national conference rather than the current every 2 years. So I guess what I'm saying is go to an annual national rather than a biennial national is what you're suggesting as a possibility.
That's right. I mean, and to move it from region to region every year so that the leadership and the resources and the workload, frankly, gets passed around.
Another organization who probably 10 years ago did make that change is the Catholic Musicians Organization. They had a very similar structure, although I think they might have had 9 regions, and they would do their national conference in odd years, and they would do a regional in each of those 9 regions in the even years. But about 10 years ago, they switched and stopped doing all the regionals and went to doing a national conference every year. Now, interestingly for them, they still found that more people attended those national conferences in the odd years along the routine that they've been used to for many years. So that was kind of interesting. But I think AGO also is doing their national every 2 years and then regionals in the off years. And they're continuing that so far anyway, I think. Maybe there's a little adjustment. So good questions. Now, one of the things actually that the Catholic musicians have done that wouldn't perhaps work as well is they have kept all of their national conferences in sort of the East, Midwest, maybe a little South, because that's where they get the largest attendance. So, that may not work exactly the way we'd prefer it to work either.
I was just going to add to it, it just seemed like for so many years we got used to that tradition of the big national and then the regionals. And, again, just kind of echoing what Cheryl was saying earlier, I think we saw so many of those smaller conferences, even one-day workshops. Perhaps not everyone was able to reach or travel for them. Some were had low attendances. Others really did surprisingly well. I think the beauty of all of this is that even if we were to go to a national, it doesn't mean then we can't have other options on the table. And that's the beauty of this, is that it's a both and rather than an either or. And I think that's one of the freeing things of, and the exciting things, in part because of our financial situation too, that so often when we looked at where we were going to go, the venues and so forth, we were all afraid because of the whole financial cloud hovering before we even had one dream put on the table. And so we are able to dream and think in new, exciting ways. And maybe it would be considering different ways to do a national every year, but also encourage local congregations. If you've got some excited musicians that want to host for, reading sessions or whatever it might be, I think that there's that support. And certainly with digital, being able to spread the word around digitally, we don't have to pay for lots of expensive mailings and different things like that. And the beauty too is that, say, a person like me in Indiana, if I kind of target and invite a few people from Illinois, I'm not, even though it's a different region at this point, it's still not quite the feeling, I think, of violation that I'm violating Region 3 by inviting them over to Indiana. So it's just some exciting things, I think, that lie ahead for us.
I think your analysis of it's a both is really a good one, because that really, Region 1, I'll pick on Mike's region and your region, historically has done extremely well in running regional conferences, and you get good attendance and good presenters and good curriculum, et cetera. And then we've had other regions, and I'll pick on my own, Region 2, where we're not as good at that. And part of that's geography. And I think, Ron, you experienced some of that with geography in Region 4. Folks from Texas aren't going to come to Virginia for something, and vice versa. Virginia is not going to go to Texas. And so we don't do as well with those regional conferences, and those make them a little scarier. But there's nothing in this proposal, and we want in the future to move forward that, if Region 1 wants to do a conference, they should do a conference. I mean, they absolutely should. But then there's no requirement for Region 2 to say you must do this if it's not going to work.
I live in Virginia, and I can assure you I'm not going to Texas for a one-day workshop.
I'm with you. I'm not going either.
I might go to Maryland. I can go to St. Luke's up in Silver Spring, which is a half an hour away, and they're in a different region. And I've done it many times, but I'm not going to Texas.
Well, and I can tell you, when we were looking at 2016 here in Fort Wayne, immediately one of the first things, Cheryl, you may remember this, was that whole discussion of how long the conference should be. Because if someone is going to spend, their resources to get to Fort Wayne, then we want to give them their money's worth. On the other side of the coin was, well, but for those who aren't full-time musicians, for those who are trying to take off, who have very limited budgets from their churches, 4 days is too long. And so again, the beauty of all of this is that we could maybe offer some extended offerings, but I said offerings twice, but we could also do some of these smaller one-day things in Virginia and in Texas, and it's a win-win.
You can come down to Richmond anytime, Wallace. I'll welcome you down here.
If
I'm not going down 95 if it's snowing.
No, don't.
Well, if I can add one more thing, and then you all can mute me. One of the things that we've discovered through this pandemic, and we've discussed even as a board, is the fact that now that we're used to Zoom meetings and everything else, there are also other ways that people can come and attend conferences and be a part of things without even traveling. So it's a whole new world in just the last 2 years in terms of how we think through some of our offerings and that to people. So you may still get to Texas yet without having to turn the car on. So you know, and that again is another exciting component that came out of this massive a pandemic, really.
Well, this Valpo conference is the first time that we're both offering, you know, virtual and able to record things, as everybody has been asking for decades now. Why can't we record our national conferences and the services and all the concerts and all of that kind of stuff? Well, and Bob's right. We're finally at that point now where we can do that. So we're not tied geographically in ways that we were when the organization first started. I mean, that's just kind of the heart of it all.
Yeah. Coming into the 21st century and, you know, having a little bit of money and having good people willing to work and all those things put us in a very different place right now, for which we're all grateful. Okay, are there any other questions? I don't want to cut anybody short, but I want to be aware of your time and respect that time. We really appreciate you coming to ask the questions. You know that the meeting is Monday night, and that is at 8 p.m. Eastern time, so you can adjust that to wherever you might be. Hopefully we can gather everybody. The board will actually be meeting, most of us in Chicago at that time, and we will join you from that meeting with enhanced safety precautions in place. So we look forward to that time. I see you laughing, Bob.
And that's Monday, the 17th.
That's correct. Yes, not this coming Monday.
The safety precautions for the board.
Yes.
I do have one question that has absolutely nothing to do with the bylaws, if I may ask it.
You may.
Thank you. I would like to make an offer to pastors and worship leaders, either choir directors, organists, of providing a complimentary copy to the first 25 people who request it of my book that just came out in September, Windows on Worship. And I would like to, if it's, Cheryl, I called the office yesterday and left a voicemail. I'm not sure how to get this into the monthly email that will probably coming out in February, but to you, I'll give you guys the first opportunity. First 25 pastors, worship leaders, musicians that request a copy, I'd be happy to send you a complimentary copy of that. Just send me an email at cellooregon@verizon.net. cellooregon@verizon.net, and I'll be happy to send you a copy. The first 25 people across the country open to the membership, and I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Wallace, can you tell us a little bit more about the book?
Sure. It's 52 devotional readings for those who lead, plan, and engage in worshiping God. 52 devotional readings for those who plan, lead, and engage in worshiping God. And it's a compilation of things that I have written over the last 20, 25 years. Some of these articles were written when I was a member of the National Association of Church Musicians, which used to be the CCG out in Southern California, Choral Conductors Guild. Howard Swan and some of those people were the founders of that. And we had a bi-monthly magazine that came out called The Journal. And I would write a column 6 times a year called Window on Worship. So I went back and rewrote some of these and put them together. Some of these are also devotions and articles that I've written at the congregational situation for the particular congregation I was in. And 52, you can read them all in one sitting. You can read one a week. Each of them has a Bible verse, and they're 1 page in length, and it's divided into 5 sections. There's windows on personal devotion and prayer, windows on a reflection of worship theology and practice, windows on preparing for worship, windows on the church year and worship, and windows on worship that transforms lives. And there's about 9, 10, 11 devotionals, essays in each section. And
Wallace, send one of the books to our new cross accent editor, Clayton Faulkner. You can
Well, I
look
sent
up,
one to Chad. I sent one to Chad when he was still editor, and I'm hoping that he passed it on. And that hopefully it came out in this latest copy of Cross Accent. I don't know if it did or not. That asking for a book review in there. I haven't got my copy yet in the mail, but if I don't see it this month, I'll send it again to the new editor.
yeah, it's at the mailing house, so you'll get it by the end of January probably, but I can't tell you if it's in there.
Okay, yeah. I sent it to Chad around October or so, and he has a copy, so hopefully he pass that information on. But cello organ at verizon.net. If you'd like a copy, give me your name, your address, and just if you're a pastor or a musician or a worship leader, that'd be great to kind of track that too. Thanks a lot, Kevin. I appreciate the opportunity.
You bet.
Willis, I'll be in touch with you. I'll email you about getting it in the newsletter.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that said, I think we'll draw our meeting to a close, and we hope that we'll see you all on the 17th at our full membership meeting and vote. Hopefully that meeting will not be too long. Our intention is to move it along as quickly as possible, but thanks for taking time out of your schedule to come and ask your questions today and be a part of the exciting stuff that's going on with this. I think we're very, very excited about moving forward in a very good new direction.
Thanks for all of your work on it. I know it's not always a joy, right?
Well, it's been going on for years. So can you see the beaming joy in my face as we could actually say we're going to actually vote on this?
Yeah.
And Kevin, let's hook up. Let's meet in Fredericksburg someplace and have lunch.
Okay, that's excellent. If I don't have to drive through Fredericksburg, that's awesome. My son goes to school at Shenandoah in Winchester, so I can easily make that commute.
My son was there for a while too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks
Thank
for
you all
coming,
so much.
everyone.
Kevin
Thank
and
you.
Thanks a
Jim,
lot.
Kevin
Take
and
care.
Jim, do you guys want to stick on for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
I assume you
I'm
mean,
gonna,
Yeah, well, you could stick on if you, I just wanted to know, we need to figure out what we're going to actually do then on the 17th.
I'm gonna bring the
Um,
recording to a stop just to
perfect.
let you know.
I'll let you guys work it out. I'll see you.